Hello, everyone. I am Kalina Black, and I work in the Library of Congress's Professional Learning and Outreach Initiatives Office. And welcome to the first of 4 sessions of the Double Take webinar series. We're really glad that you're joining us today. Just so you know, this event will be recorded, and so any questions or other participant contributions may be made publicly available as part of the library's archives. So in this Double Take series, we're going to be exploring intriguing and sometimes puzzling images from the Library of Congress's collections, and we'll also be learning some research tips along the way with an expert from the Prints and Photographs Division. So today we'll be led by Christy Finefield, a reference specialist in Prints and Photographs. Christy's Double Take series, her blog series, is actually the basis for this set of webinars, so hopefully she'll be able to talk to us a little bit about that once she's finished with her presentation. We really encourage you to participate via chat, whether it's with responses to Christy's questions, comments, questions. Please feel free to participate and let us know what you're thinking. Just to get started using the chat, if you could just tell us your first name and where you're joining us from, that'd be great. Just make sure that you have all presenters and attendees or everyone selected so that we all can read what you have to say. So just before I turn things over to Christy, just want to give a quick just heads up, shout out to our library colleagues who are joining us in the chat as well today. We have some colleagues from the Prints and Photographs Division who will help answer questions and support us in that way. And also my colleague Dana will be posting URLs in the chat as we go along. So with that, I'm really happy to pass things over to our presenter, Christy Finefield from the Prints and Photographs Division.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Kalina, for that introduction to our new web series. I want to thank everybody who is here for joining us today, and I'll repeat a few things from what Kalina said. My name is Christy Finefield, and I am a reference specialist in the Prints and Photographs Division of the Library of Congress. And if we have any readers in the audience of the blog of the Prints and Photographs Division, which is called Picture This, you might be familiar with the occasional series there known as Double Take. Posts in that series tend to be inspired either by my own curiosity while conducting research in our collections or a question from a researcher about an image. In these posts and throughout the series, we'll look closely and deeply into images to try and address the question asked about that particular image. At the same time, teach you a little bit about photo research techniques and how reference librarians like myself and in our other presentations in the series, curators and catalogers interact and interpret our collections. So today's talk sprang from a blog post in the Double Take series from July 2019. It had its origin in a researcher asking me a pretty straightforward question. Does this photo include the White House or not? I hope you'll enjoy joining me today as I take you on this research journey through the process of answering this question, as well as many other questions that arose along the way. And as Kalina said, this will be an interactive webinar, so when I pose questions, please feel free to jump in and respond in the chat. And if we have some DC locals and you recognize some of the sites or buildings shown, try to play along so that everyone else without that local knowledge can work the questions out with me. So let's get started. Next slide, please. So one of the premises of photo research and visual literacy techniques is look closely. Really simple concept, but really useful, especially if you're a patient and take time with it. So when we say to look closely, we want you to study an image in detail, front and back if there is a back to look at. If it's a physical photograph, we often suggest using a magnifying glass so you can really get into the details. And if it's a digital image or an image that's been scanned, like the one we're going to look at today, to really zoom in, look at the details, and try to see all that you can see. And the best way to then interpret what you've seen is to write down keywords, observations, things like that, anything you see in the photo. So we're going to start with that exercise today with the photo that launched this particular blog post. From a researcher. And we're going to put up the photo next, and then if you can jump in the chat and tell me what do you see in this photo. So hopefully while you've been looking, even though I can't see the chat results, you've been picking up some of the details in this photograph. And I'm going to show you, the next slide is where I recorded some of the things I saw in the photo, and you can see if you observed the same. So there's across the top of the photo, we have a title that includes names of people. Mirza Ali Quli Khan and wife. Sorry for that possibly terrible pronunciation. There looks to be a carriage to the right, which I would assume is led by a horse or some kind of animal. It might be a married couple. That's an assumption, but it's a couple standing there together. They look like they've just exited or are entering that carriage. They're dressed rather formally, wearing some fancy clothes, going to an event maybe. It might be cold outside. There's furs. Possibly, maybe the gentleman on the left is foreign based on his costume. Hard to know that. That's an assumption you'd have to test out. On the bottom left corner, that looks to be a date written into this is actually a glass negative in its original form, reversed and written on the negative. If you zoom in very closely on the gentleman, he is wearing medals on his waistcoat there, or his garment. They're not smiling, so hopefully they're happy to be there. They're outdoors, and the building behind them could be the White House. It has that look, right? So I've collected now, just by looking at the photo, we've collected up some details about the image. So let's go on and think about how else we can gather information. So if we go to the next slide. So one of the ways to expand your circle of understanding about an image is to seek and explore the context of that image. And there's a couple different ways you could go about that. One of the ways I'll talk about now is about looking at the accompanying information with that image. So in this case, that might be information on the object. And in the last slide, we observed that there was a title written across the top, directly on the item, and what looked to be a date in the bottom left corner. So that's two pieces of information that are directly on the item. We can look at the catalog description, meaning if it's been part of a collection, like at the Library of Congress, and it's been cataloged and described, we can see what information is there. And we can also, if we know it's part of a collection, we can look at that collection and find out what the subject matter is of the collection, the time period, focus of it. It might go a little bit towards understanding the intent of the image. And then when you're taking in all that information, one of the things you want to notice is what are the sources of that information, and do you consider them reliable? And I see we might have fixed the chat problem, so if someone could put something in the chat just to see. Oh, I see someone. Okay, there's Cheryl Davis. Great. Okay, great. So next questions, you'll be able to jump in and talk to me this time. So hopefully, if anyone had observed anything about the photo that they that I didn't or didn't note, you can feel free to jump in and say it now while we go on to the next thing. So if we go to the next slide, this is, if you were to find this image, which is how the researcher found it in the first place, in the Prints and Photographs online catalog, this is the kind of information you would read. This is a fairly straightforward record. It has a title at the top, and that's taken directly from the object, transcribed. And then it has the date, which was taken also from the object in this case. And it's May 28th, 1913. Now we have a particular time. I've blocked out what's the summary note. The summary note usually describes the photograph, like what is happening in the image. And I don't want to give away any spoilers for our talk, so I'll keep that obscured for now, but you can look at it later. And then at the bottom, what I've highlighted is that we do let you know that this is part of the George Grantham Bain collection. And right below that, there is a link that's going to tell you more about that collection. And right above the box, I didn't highlight it, but where it says title and date from data provided by the Bain News Service on the negative. So that's where we confirm where the information in this record comes from. So that's a good observation. That's true. The White House, the building is far away, so it's a little fuzzy. They're not looking at the camera operator. That's a good observation. And it's surprising, if it's in May, the fact that there are no leaves on the trees is a little interesting. And she thinks maybe it's February 28th because the number in the month looks the same. And of course, that number is inverted and reversed, so there's always a chance it's misread. So that'll be interesting to try to find out if that is actually the wrong date. So let's go on to the next slide. So the link that was in the previous record leads you to this homepage for the George Grantham Bain collection. And this is where you can kind of set the scene for the photo. Why did someone take the photo in the first place? Because that's always a good question to ask. So the Bain collection, we sometimes also call it the Bain News Service collection, is the photographic files of one of America's earliest news picture agencies. It was based in New York City, so a lot of the images are in New York, but they covered events in other cities as well, like Washington, D.C. And what they were doing was taking photographs that were then distributed to their subscribers to be used in newspapers generally or other kinds of publications. So obviously people photographed, if the photographer is taking your picture when they're working for Bain, they think it's newsworthy in some way. So you're someone well known or you're attending an important event, et cetera, et cetera. So that kind of just sets our scene. Also, most of the photos in this collection were taken around between the 1900s and the 1920s. So that this one sits kind of right in the middle of that time period. So keeping all of that in mind, let's go to the next slide. So we've gathered up a little bit of information. We've looked at the item really closely. We've read a little bit about it, what we know, but none of that information really told us if this is the White House or not. And that was the question the researcher brought to us. So what would you suggest? What would you do next if you were trying to figure out if that building in the background was the White House? That's a good suggestion. Find another image of the White House to compare with it. Look for information on the two people. That's another great idea. Another kind of context. Look for other DC photos to compare. Yep. You've all got the idea. So let's go on to the next slide because you've definitely hit right on the two approaches I would take. So what we're trying to do is expand our understanding of the photo and try to find some more context to set it in. So we would look for related photographs to the photo we're studying. Look for ones that are of similar subject matter. In this case, look at the White House pictures to see similar time period. You might look at other photos in the same collection. And then you use those photos to help kind of question the assumptions you made at first glance, like things that you thought were true, you can see if they are true. The other way to approach it is to look for textual information in newspapers and periodicals, especially from the time period. So I'm going to talk about the second thing first, because we're going to focus a little bit more on the related photos aspect. So I did search at the time when I was researching this question. I looked for more information about Mr. Khan and his wife. And I did learn some things. I found out that he was originally from Persia, which is mostly modern day Iran. And he was the charge d'affaires, pardon my accent, of Persia to the US. So he had a diplomatic position with the United States. He was married to an American. Her name is Florence Breed. We added that information later. It was not, as you saw, she was just referred to as wife in the photo. He married her in 1904, and they moved to the U.S. Permanently around that, like after that time period. And so at this time, they probably lived in D.C. To probably confirm that, but at this point, based on other things I read, they probably lived in D.C. at this point because he was doing this job through the State Department. So that definitely helps us say, well, the photo was probably taken in D.C. But the other thing I tried to explore was try to find information based on the date, which again, we're going with the date on the item, as to why he and his wife were in DC at that time, or why they were going to an event, or just something in the social pages, et cetera. And I didn't come upon anything that gave me that information. And it could be out there, but I'm a visual person, obviously, from working in the Prints and Photographs division. So I went back to the first idea, which was to look for related photographs. So if we go to the next slide, what I did was go through our online catalog, and you have to be prepared. You know, our division has, I think at last count, almost 16 million images, and there's well over 1.25 million in our online catalog. So it's real easy to get kind of lost in the catalog. So what I did here was I tried to find a picture of the White House so I could compare it to our photo and see if it was the same building. So what I did was I searched for White House. I put that in quotes to kind of narrow down the results. And I looked for an image from 1913. I didn't really find an image that was the right type of image. It didn't show the right front, the right side of the building. It wasn't as clear. So I went to 1914, and this is the image I came up with that seemed really close to the same angle of the image. So if we look, before we go to the next slide, if you just kind of look closely, kind of take in the details of this photo and keep them in mind, because we're going to do a comparison on the next slide. Thinking about what you saw in the first one. Now, obviously, if you were doing this research not online with me on a computer, you could actually look at the two photos next to each other probably. We have to kind of improvise, when we're doing it this way. So the event here, and actually I should go back, the caption for this photo is Easter egg rolling White House. So this photo was also good because we could be 100% sure this is the White House. I can see much more of the building. I can see the wing over there to the left. The Easter egg roll is an annual event at the White House. So we had a lot to go on here to say we definitely got a picture of the White House relative to the other one, which wasn't identified. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to take the two photos and I zoomed in on the details and put them side by side. So if we kind of look closely at the two areas I've highlighted, do you see any similarities or differences that stand out to you? That's true. You can't see the stairs in the first photo. And it's kind of hard because that one isn't as focused. And let's see. This person says, is that a fountain to the left of Mr. Khan? It might be. It might also just be a strange tree. It's a little hard to tell, when the people are the focus of the photo. So the buildings are a little out of focus. The windows look different. Yeah, I think I would say without having super sharp comparison that the details, like the pendentives on top of the windows, I think that's the right term, look a little different. The columns seem higher on the right picture. I would agree. I think those columns seem narrower and taller. Again, it's hard to see if those arches below the portico are visible in the picture with Khan. It's hard to tell because we do have a slightly different angle on the photo, so that's tricky. And I do think the capitals might be different. This person observes that the ones on the left look more like an Ionic capital, and the ones on the right would be Corinthian. And I think they're even a little bit of a modified capital style. There's a railing in the photo on the right and not the left. And of course, like I said, we are within a year, these two photos. But one thing to keep in mind with a building like the White House, of course, is that it's been renovated many times. And that was kind of important that we got an image as close to the same time period as possible. But it's pretty easy also to find out what things were changed over time. There's lots of books written about the White House. So one thing I noticed, and I'll point out, is you can see on the right there's a chimney that is not visible on the left. You can see the roof line, the dark roof on the left, but not the right. It's hard to tell if that's because of perspective, but these were both taken by a person. They're not up on a crane or something. But the most telling detail for me was this bump out on the edge of the portico. So if you look at the left photo, there's an extension of the curved portico and then an additional column. You can see there's a shadow that shows you this is an actual column, not a pilaster, which is a column that's flat against the building. In the White House picture, you can see it's a flat thing. There's no shadow because it's not a physical column that has space between it and the building. And it is hard to tell, but the shadow is pretty big, showing you that it stands out. So having looked, if we go to the next slide, we're going to go look even closer. And as best I can do with the quality of the left image, you can see that's a pretty significant architectural detail. So it's unlikely that they would have added and then removed the column, and I could confirm that by researching the White House. And if we could go back a slide, actually, I wanted to talk again about the proportions of these columns. So if you look at the one on the right, they're narrow, the space between them is pretty big. And on the left, it feels smaller in scale. So taken all together, we go forward again. What do you think in the chat? What do you think? Is this the same building or not? I have a no. I have a not the same. Nope, don't think so. Nope, not. All right, let's go to the next slide. I agree. This is not the White House, but it's super similar to the White House, right? So we've kind of addressed that question, the first question. But how could we now, why stop at one question, right? Now that I know it's not the White House, I'd love to identify what building it is so we can actually add that to our catalog record, because you can imagine it looks so much like the White House that people are going to keep seeing that image and think it is. So I wanted to keep going on this question. So what suggestions would you give? How could we figure out what building this actually is? And I am seeing responses, so that's good. Hopefully everyone is responding in the way that someone suggests use the research on the date of the event. You have to try to figure out what event that is. Someone says, do we know anything about the Khan's life, where they were on that date? So keep the ideas coming. Let's go to the next slide. Ask Mr. Google, buildings that look like the White House. That's a good idea. I don't know. I don't think I actually tried that. Research the architect, so we'd have to find out who the architect was. Look for other prominent buildings similar to the White House. That's a good idea. What events were taking place in DC on that date? So sort of doing what you're doing, what I did was I reviewed what I knew at the time. So I went back through all that information we gathered. I knew the man in the photo is involved in political affairs, which would bring him to DC, because I also wanted to make sure it was a good assumption that we were in DC, knowing that that collection has lots of photos of New York, but it looks like DC. And sometimes you do have to operate on a hunch. I work in DC, lived in the area for 20 plus years. That looks like DC to me. Those kind of buildings are very common in DC with the neoclassical look. So it's consistent with architecture I've seen around DC. It's possibly a government or institutional building, just that look. The White House obviously is a unique case, but most residences don't have that look, especially if we might be downtown DC. But the real challenge of what I know is what I don't know. I don't know anything that lends itself to keyword searches. So it's something to type into the magic box, and type into our catalog and try to figure it out. And I think I even tried, it was last year, but I think I even tried putting in the image and doing an image search, but that building looks so much like the White House that Google can't figure that out either. So if we go to the next slide, and I do think we're probably, like I said, in DC as well, because I think the Khans lived in DC at that time, but I still wasn't able to find out anything about them attending an event on that date. So that kind of, stopped me for a second. So on the next slide, this is what I would call you've sort of hit a, research brick wall. You have to think about it differently. You can't sometimes just bull ahead through the wall. You have to think about how to get over the wall. And just as a side comment, Urbane News Service photos arranged chronologically. You can look at related neighboring images in the collection. Sometimes that will give you images taken on the same date, and I did do that when I was searching it. But also they're organized by the negative numbers, and sometimes that doesn't actually work out. So one of the things I would suggest when you're trying to get over a research brick wall is to ask for help. So one of the best things you can do is ask someone who knows more about the subject than you do, or knows more about like the collection you're researching in. So for example, you might ask me, if you were in the reading room doing research and you had this picture and said, I want to know what building that is, you could talk to me about it and we would try to work out a way to kind of get around the problem. The other thing you have to do is be willing to browse and be patient, because when you don't know what to type into search, you're going to have to just look sometimes, then try to find things that way. So in this case, I consulted myself and I sat down and thought about what I knew about this and said, how would I identify an unidentified building in DC? And I don't have a lot else to go on at this time except for those people on that page. So I thought about what collections we have that are from the same time period, that are of DC, and that might feature kind of public buildings or buildings that looked significant. DC is a tourist town, and people come and look at these fancy buildings we have and take pictures of them. So a collection that came to mind, and of course I did a lot of other browsing and looking around in between, but didn't have a lot of success elsewhere, so continue to keep coming at the problem from different angles. And then I just saw a comment from a regular asker of Ask a Librarian, our Cheryl. She has asked me questions before through Ask a Librarian, and we have gotten to those answers. So what came to mind for me for the next steps, if we go to the next slide. And that's a good sidebar. In the chat, someone has suggested searching for Portico, and that can work. But the tricky part about it is our collections are vast. And in order to get as much content online as possible, we often will rely on the information on the object. And so you might have a picture that just says south front of the White House. And those are the keywords that are searchable in the record. And nowhere in the record do they mention the portico. So searching sometimes by architectural details of photos won't get you the results you're hoping for in our collections, because we haven't always gone down to that level of description in order to get more images cataloged faster. So what came to mind, though, was this particular collection we have called Souvenir View Books. And this page is clipped out of a blog post that was just shared in the chat, introducing our readers to this collection. And one way we use our blog is to share collections that aren't digitized, or only a little bit of the content is digitized, so you know that there is a reason to come visit us in person and explore our collections there, and to talk to the staff and get some ideas. So souvenir view books were things that people don't know that there's really a parallel anymore, but a little book of views of the city you visited. Sometimes they're on a theme of a type of building. This particular one is General Government and State Capitol Buildings of the U.S. So someone who is interested in that subject would buy this book, and it would be postcard size, but also larger views of those kinds of buildings. You might go to New York City and buy one. You might go to the Great Lakes and buy pictures. So there are all kinds of things that people bought as souvenirs. So I thought, well, we have a pretty good sized collection of view books of Washington, D.C. So maybe if I flip through them, I can spot a building that has this distinctive White House-like look. Because you can even see in this image how many government buildings have those columns, as their fronts. So I started going through our DC souvenir view books, and next slide. Eureka! Happily, I saw this picture, and I said, well, that looks like the building. It has that the curved portico that I remembered seeing in the other one. But it's from a different angle, so it would be nice to get a different image. But the key thing I found here is that I got some words to search by. So at the bottom of the page, we get this. This is the Memorial Continental Hall. If you're a DC local, you may recognize that name, and maybe not, but we'll proceed. So the good news from there is that, by my browsing, I've come up with something I can actually search by. So if we go to the next slide, I went back out of the files, our browsing files, and went into the online catalog again. And I searched by Memorial Continental Hall. And you can see in the caption that because those words appeared in our title, I was able to get this image. And this image definitely shows, it's a little closer to the same angle as the original photo. And you can see that that bump out we were observing in that blurry photo is pretty visible here. You can see that there's an extra little corner extending and another column that looks to be, almost attached to the building. It's not flat, but it's not as big as the other columns maybe. And you can see that dark roof line is visible, and the chimney that we noticed, or think there's probably symmetrical chimneys. So this looks to be the building in the photo. So we've answered 2 questions at this point. And, I did a lot of comparing before I decided that, because I could see a lot more details on this particular image because it's been scanned at high resolution. So I said, okay, I'm pretty sure it's not the White House and it is this building, but I still have a few more questions and I'd love to address them. And you'll notice as well, if you read the caption, it was taken between 1910 and 1919. So I know that it is of the same time period, which is really important, obviously. So let's go on to what I'm calling the bonus round. Do you think this couple is visiting Memorial Continental Hall? Why or why not? Let's look at the original photo again because it's been a while. So this is our first photo. So what we think is in the background is Memorial Continental Hall. Okay, so some people think it looks like a staged photo, that they're standing in front of a photo of the hall. Well, that's interesting, not casting shadows. What do you think about where they are relative to that building? Someone says, are they across the street? They're pretty far away from it. And someone says it looks like they're visiting somewhere else in the neighborhood. So let's go back to the photo or go forward to the next slide. So if you look at that building, if you were visiting Memorial Continental Hall, where would you be? Let's go to the next one. So what I'm pointing out here is that on the right, that arrow points to kind of the entry or carriageway. That's probably where, if you were going to an event in this building wearing those fancy clothes, I feel like that's where you would be dropped off, not where they seem to be standing. Or at least, at the very least, the left side, that road, that street leads to another entrance to the building. So it seems a little, unlikely that they're actually going to this building. Based on that distance, I don't think they're meant to be dropped off and walk away in their fancy clothes. So let's go to yet another question. How can we figure out where they're standing? And I see some folks in the chat have done a little research. They're figuring out that the building, the Memorial Continental Hall, is related to the Daughters of the American Revolution. It was actually built as the DAR headquarters in 1910. And so and it was called Memorial Continental Hall at the time. It's a good idea. So other suggestions: look at a map from the time period. Time to go for a walk near the building. I do that a lot virtually through Google Street View, especially right now, and walk around the neighborhood. All right, let's go to the next slide. So if we go back to some of our original concepts, looking for related photographs. Often related photographs give me answers, and I love to go visual when I'm trying to figure out a question. So I took what I have learned, which was that's Memorial Continental Hall, and thought, well, let me try to search further by that name and see what other kind of photos I find of it. Maybe I can get some more clues. So if you read the caption of this photo, Memorial Continental Hall, National Headquarters of DAR, from steps of Pan American Union. So that gives us some brand new information. And if we look a little closer at this image on the next slide, we've got, it looks like we have more trees are visible, so we can't see the building as well as in the original photograph. But that looks like the same driveway. What does everyone think about that? Seems more likely that they are maybe in that drive. Yeah, and this one is a really close angle to the original photograph, I would say. I agree with that comment. And let's go forward to the next slide. It'll show you the original photo again. So you kind of keep that in mind. We can't see that curve in the drive, but we can certainly see below the carriage that there's some kind of change in the pavement. So it's sidewalk and driveway. So if we look at their position relative, let's go back one slide again. You can kind of imagine that to your left, there's more building that we can't see. We saw a little bit of it in the slide before this one. And this photo was taken in 1917, so there's some differences in the landscape. And I think actually the pavement, we're looking at maybe a 4-year difference. So it looks like they actually repaved that driveway though. So if we go forward. So at this point, I would say, and actually, let's go back one slide before I get that. I'm feeling like it's very likely, based on all those context clues, that they're being dropped off at the Pan American Union, which is another building in DC. And that gives us, yet another piece of information we can use in searches to try to keep expanding and exploring our assumptions, because you're always trying to make links in a chain, basically, in research. You're trying to figure out something and then use that to link to the next piece of information and then continue to move forward until you build enough of a story to confirm your original assumption. So at this point, I'm thinking, okay, we know this isn't the White House. We think it's Memorial Continental Hall in the background, but based on the distance from the building, they're more likely to be visiting the Pan American Union. And someone says, we'd love to see this side of the building facing away from Memorial Continental Hall. And we certainly could explore that in the online catalog. Our division's collections, we have about 750,000 photographs of Washington, D.C. scattered throughout different collections. So you can find, I wouldn't say you can find a picture of every building in D.C., but the more well-known buildings, for sure, you can get multiple views usually. And we don't know also, I guess, what time of day this one is. It certainly doesn't seem to be a very sunny day, if anything. We're still wondering if maybe it's winter and not May. So at this point, I want to continue to explore my new assumption that this is the Pan Am building relative to Memorial Continental Hall. So I went back to the online catalog and I searched for Pan American Union to try to find pictures of the building, since we really can't see it in that other photo. So if we go to the next slide, what I came upon was this really interesting aerial photograph. It's aerial, not exactly, it's taken from the Washington Monument. You'll find that there are lots of early images that are as close as you'll get to an aerial photo. There are some aerial photos, but this one is from a great height. So this is taken from the Washington Monument, and you'll find views where they take pictures out of all the windows, and you'll get a great kind of near 360 of DC. So this particular one, the reason I got it in my searches was that I typed in Pan American Union, because it's the building, that white building, kind of dead center, is the Pan American Union. So the caption is Washington Monument, view of Pan American Union and Northwest from the monument. It dates between 1913 and 1918, so we're right there in that sweet spot for the time period again. And if we zoom in a little bit, on the next slide, sorry, we've got a pretty familiar set of building to our right there. So I think, based on all the clues we've collected so far, we've got Memorial Continental Hall on the right, which at the time was the only DAR building. The Constitution Hall had not yet been built at this time period. It's going to end up being to the left where those rows of type barrack type buildings are. And then that star kind of marks the spot. You know, with all these connected clues, we landed on the spot where those folks are likely standing, attending something at the Pan American Union, most likely. It's now called the Organization of American States. So you could use all the search terms you know to keep digging and figure out, you know, maybe there was an event at maybe searching by the Pan American Union, you could actually figure out what event it was. Maybe their names weren't mentioned in the paper, that kind of thing. But for now, I feel like I've answered the original question and expanded on it further to actually give us a full picture of this picture, at least, you know, as far as we could go with just these images. And I would point out as well that the lawn you're seeing to the right, that is the ellipse. So the White House is about less than a mile away from this photograph. So that little kind of mini looking White House and the real White House were actually quite close to each other. So at that point, I think we've, you know, reached the end of this particular research journey. That we can definitely think of some things you can keep going to search for and learn a little bit more. And so I thank everyone for their attention and for all their interaction. And I'd love to take any more questions you have. And we can go on to the next slide.
Thank you so much, Christy, and thanks everyone for participating. Sorry for that little snafu at the beginning. We're glad everyone was able to chime in. Please do put any questions that you have into the chat. I see
I'm adding a link to the chat just to see this, a different aerial photograph that shows you how close this building is to the White House at the same time period. And these buildings do both still exist, so you could look at them today. Speak to why the foreground and the background have such different colors. In the original photograph, it's a good question. I would think that I'm not as well versed. So actually one of our photo curators, I think, is in the call, as with the photographic technology of the time. I think the depth of field was pretty shallow, meaning they were very, very much in focus with who was very close to them and very, very fuzzy and faint for what's in the distance. And you can tell from that aerial photograph, that building is actually pretty far away from them. It's half a block. So I think that accounts for some of the different lighting, and the light is probably there in the shadow of the Pan Am Union, and the other building might be in full light. So and also they obviously were, the tricky part though is you can't actually account for, someone had mentioned the photograph may be exposed to feature the couple, and they certainly took the photo to feature this couple, but the image we're actually looking at is a scan of a glass negative. And we don't modify the exposures of the negative, so it's pretty much exactly how it was taken. We have kind of a standard way of scanning to kind of get as much information as possible. They might have modified this photo a little bit when they printed it, but it certainly does have, which all of you notice, kind of a strange staged look. Like the front, they seem kind of disconnected almost from the background. And I think that can be somewhat accounted for by the distance between them and the building. And someone did ask a question about is there a strong connection between the Bain collection and particular newspapers? Offhand, I can't name newspapers, but I definitely have found credited photos in the Bain collection in New York newspapers and occasionally in others as well. That was a nice zoom in, whoever did that. You can really see their outfits are quite lovely. So you can find, if you start looking through newspapers from that time period, I think the other New York newspapers, not the Times, I found more Bain photos in. A lot of times when they digitize newspapers, they don't give like the photo credits. So you end up having to look for the subject and then look at the bottom to see if they've credited anyone, and they'll say Bain News Service or just Bain sometimes. But what I wanted to share, I'll share in the chat as well. Let me see if I saved it. Yeah. This is another photo of the same couple. You can see him so he's in maybe some kind of traditional garb from Persia. He was also Baha'i, and that may have something to do with it. But you can see in the picture I shared, he was wearing standard American suit. So you can't always make all the assumptions based on what they're wearing in that. If you click the link, I can't share the picture in the screen, but if you click that link that I just shared, you can see that picture. Does anyone have any other questions they want to ask? And keep in mind, I think if we go to the last slide of the presentation, I've shared a couple links here. Ask a Librarian is a way you can reach out to myself or any other librarians in my division, and we also share questions with our curators. So if you have questions, keep going and ask us those questions, and we're glad to follow up, especially even questions based on this. And the Princeton Photographs online catalog is the catalog dedicated to just this collection, or just to our division's holdings. And the Researcher's Toolbox is full of resources that help you with photo research. It's got all kinds of presentations over time and tips for how to do photo research. And I will point out my colleagues who are running the show they work a lot with educators and teachers, and their website, which I think Dana could probably put up quickly, they provide lots of help for curriculum building and teaching teachers how to use our resources in their classrooms.
Christy, I saw a couple other questions for you.
Let me scroll back up.
Yep. One was do you ever have to do this kind of sleuthing to determine if more recent born digital images are accurate and unaltered?
That has not come up for me. I'm not involved, as a reference librarian, I'm not involved in acquisition very much. Sometimes I will provide some subject advice or at least mention researcher demand in the collecting. But our curators who focus on collecting new things for the collection, I think it comes to them to determine about born digital images, what we're collecting, whether we are concerned about them being modified, what's acceptable in that way. So it's a good question. I haven't personally been asked that question, and we do tend to address these kind of questions about our images, the collection and things in our collection. So if someone did bring a new, brand new photo we just got to me and asked, how do we know that's true, or how do you know if it's not fake? I would certainly try to figure it out. We just would use some different tools, most likely. And did I miss any other questions? We want to go back. My chat window is so small.
Yeah, I think one was a really important question. What was in the part of the photo catalog entry that we blacked out? So Dana, if you could just repost the link to the record, I think that's a big reveal that would be great for everyone.
So this photo, I'm going to copy the caption, and this is the caption that I blocked, the summary note. All we knew was what was on the photo, and we posted this as part of our Flickr account. So the Library of Congress has participated in Flickr, if you're familiar with it, a photo sharing site, for I think 13 years now, and we share images there weekly. And some of them have very minimal captions, and people in Flickr will look into the photo and try to provide more information for us. So some of these details that are there were provided by Flickr viewers. They provided an alternate spelling for the man's name, because you often will find alternate or misspellings of especially foreign names. So you do have to question even your original caption. They provided the name of the wife, which was appreciated because, we like to have her name. So now her name is Florence Breed. So if you searched Florence Breed in our online catalog, you would now get this photo as a result. Well, before we added that note, you would not. And then the part about it being Memorial Continental Hall was added by myself through this project. Any other questions?
I'm scrolling through. I don't see any other questions right now. Just comments. I hope that you'll have a chance to look through them. Christy, there's some really nice comments here.
Great. Well, I'm glad everybody enjoyed it. It's always fun to share the behind the scenes work.
Yeah, thanks for giving us a glimpse into your process. So interesting. So many, it's so funny how questions kind of generate other questions, and before you know it, you're really down the rabbit hole.
Yes, exactly. And you just keep following your curiosity, basically, until you get to some kind of stopping point. Because, of course, I could do this for every photo in our collection, but we have 16 million, and I have the rest of my job to do. So I love when I can, spend a little time on a photo and then share that. That's why the blog is so useful. I can share the process on the blog and hopefully share, then I'm giving those tips to other people to use themselves. Yeah, and it's actually, if we could share a link to the whole Double Take blog series, y'all are welcome to read about some of the other explorations. I'm going to be doing another presentation in this, so far we have 4 sessions planned. I'll be doing another one on another blog post that's from the Double Take series. But on the other sessions, you'll get to enjoy hearing from some of my other colleagues in Prints and Photographs, curators and catalogs, talking about some of their work with our images.
Yes.
And there's the link in the chat. This is some of the other blog posts in that series.
Yes, our next session will be on February 18th and will be led by Sarah Duke, who's with us today. She's a curator in the Prints and Photographs division. So I'm going to just put a link to our webinar page just so you can learn more about the upcoming sessions and get more details on how to register for them. Just so you know, this event, like I said, we've been recording, so the recording will be available to you soon alongside the PDF of the slides. So you'll be able to revisit all of Christy's wonderful tips and get lost in the mystery again. So thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you, Christy, for being a wonderful presenter and for sharing your strategies and your research with us. And I really hope that you all will join us again for our next time session.
Yes, thank you to everyone for coming and joining in, and thanks to all my colleagues here for helping make this presentation go so smoothly.
Great. Have a good rest of the day, everyone.
Bye-bye.